I'm 32 now, a lawyer. People respect a woman who fought her way back from the edge. My name, the name I reclaimed, is Aurora Bennett, but whenever I look at my reflection, there's still a part of me that shivers remembering the night I traded my name, my youth, my freedom, for my father's survival. Back then, I was 21, Aurora Bennett, third year of law school. The library was my church, the courtroom my dream. I lived on caffeine and the quiet thrill of knowing I was building a future with my own hands. My professors said I had potential. I believed them. I saw my name on casebooks, on verdicts, on the kind of history that mattered. And then everything collapsed. I grew up with just my father, Marcus. My mother died when I was little, and my father became everything: the parent, the provider, the anchor. He worked himself raw so I could chase my dreams. He burned his hands in warehouses, sacrificed sleep, swallowed his pride 1,000 times. So when I found out about the debts, the endless loans, the sinking business, I felt the ground tilt beneath me. It wasn't just numbers. It was the roof over our heads. It was his life's work. It was survival. And then came Damian Calloway. He was 36, a man the papers called brilliant, ruthless, generous when it suited him. I had seen his name in glossy magazines, standing next to politicians, shaking hands with men who smiled like predators. When he looked at me for the first time, it wasn't the look of a man meeting a woman. It was the look of an art collector already deciding where I would hang in his private gallery. My father's voice shook when he told me, "Aurora, he can make this go away. All of it. The debt, the creditors, the threats. He can save us. Save us." 2 words that still cut me open. I asked what it would cost. Deep down, I already knew. My father couldn't say it out loud. He just lowered his eyes and whispered, "He wants you." I wanted to scream, to tell him I had exams, I had a life, I wasn't merchandise. But when I looked at him, this man who had raised me alone, who had tied my shoelaces and cooked eggs too rubbery, but full of love, I felt my resolve break. Love bends you toward yes. Damian wasted no time. He came to our apartment with a smile too polished, a bouquet too perfect. He spoke about my classes, only to remind me how tiring they must be. He praised my ambition, but not as something to be nurtured, as something to be displayed. He told me plainly what my life with him would be. No more classes, no more courtrooms. My place would be at his side, at dinners, at galas, at fundraisers. I would manage a home, bear his children, and learn to smile on command. "It will be easier when you have a baby," he said, almost tender. "You'll see what truly matters." I waited for my father to argue, to protect me. He didn't. He just nodded, as if the life raft had already been chosen for him, even if it drowned me. The weeks after felt like a blur, or a dream I couldn't wake from. Dresses fitted, invitations engraved, strangers hugging me, congratulating me, telling me how lucky I was. Every yes I said closed another door behind me. I remember packing up my dorm room, my books, my notes, the life I had built. I pressed my hand against the spines of casebooks as if I could hold on to them by touch alone. I whispered to myself, "This is temporary. You'll come back." But deep down, I already knew. The wedding was everything the magazines promised. Gold everywhere. Gold on the silverware. Gold on the cake. A cathedral of light that made everything look perfect. My father walked me down the aisle, his hand trembling on my arm. Gratitude and grief, pride and shame, all tangled together. Damian looked immaculate as always. He said the right words in the right tone. I repeated mine, but they fell from my mouth like stones into water sinking fast, vanishing. When the time came to sign, I picked up the pen with fingers that no longer felt like mine. "Aurora Bennett," I wrote, And then, just like that Aurora Calloway, my name transformed into a stranger's, a brand stamped across my skin. The applause was deafening. Champagne fizzed like laughter I didn't share. Guests smiled at me as though I had won something, and maybe I had. I had bought my father's freedom, paid with myself. That night, in the bridal suite, the silence was unbearable. The dress fell from my shoulders like chains unclasping. I stood before a mirror taller than me and saw a bride staring back. Perfect skin, perfect hair, a perfect stranger. Damien came behind me, adjusted a curl at my temple, whispered, "Beautiful." He kissed me like someone sealing a deal. "Rest now," he said. "Tomorrow will be full. You'll get used to it." When the door closed, I stared into the mirror. I tried to smile. The mouth obeyed. The eyes refused. Somewhere, in that silence, I heard the faint echo of pages turning of my own voice, rehearsing arguments in a library that now felt like a lifetime away. I whispered to that version of me, the girl who still believed in laws like stars, "You'll come back. You will." But the room didn't answer. That was the night I understood the truth. I had stepped into a cage so beautiful the world would admire it, but it was still a cage, and I had locked it from the inside. Even now, when I step into my quiet apartment after a long day at court, I hear echoes that don't belong here. Not the hum of the city, not the shuffle of neighbors in the hallway, but the silence of another house, a mansion so wide, so polished, so suffocating, that it swallowed my voice whole. Back then, I was only 21, newly married, still trembling from everything I had given up. The Calloway estate was magnificent, marble floors that caught every step like a recording, chandeliers dripping light like icicles, windows tall enough to frame the entire sky. People called it a palace, but to me, it was a mausoleum, a place where I walked but never truly lived. Damien called it home. His voice always carried ownership, as though the walls themselves bent to him. And maybe they did, because from the very first day I learned nothing inside those walls truly belonged to me. Not the clothes I wore, he chose them. Not the hours I kept, he dictated them. Not even the people I spoke to. My phone grew emptier each week. Friends faded into silence because I never answered, because he always said, "They don't belong in this life anymore." At first I smiled. I told myself it was adjustment marriage, wealth, responsibility. But beneath the sparkle of the chandeliers, there was a hollow, and it kept widening. Every time I walked past the grand staircase, I felt smaller. Every time I passed his study door closed, locked, impenetrable. I remembered how little of myself was left. I missed the library, the smell of old books, the weight of case law pressed beneath my fingers, the thrill of solving arguments in my head before professors even asked. So, I stole scraps of myself back. A book tucked under the mattress, notes scribbled at night in a corner so vast it swallowed whispers whole. I would sit in bed, lamp low, tracing words with my finger, words I once believed in. It was the only rebellion I dared. Damien noticed. Of course he did. He noticed everything. His questions came laced with a smile, but the edges were sharp, still clinging to that old dream he would ask amused. "You won't need it where we're going. You'll thank me one day." And when I didn't answer, when I pressed the book closed too quickly, the smile slipped. Patience turned into something colder. That patience never lasted long. Soon it became remarks, little cuts that didn't bleed, but bruised. "That dress doesn't suit you. Your hair should be darker, more elegant. Don't laugh so loudly, it sounds childish." Each correction was small, easy to brush aside, but together they built a prison. Invisible as air, and I learned to shrink without even realizing. I measured myself against his tone. I asked less, needed less, smiled when expected, faded when not, and at night, when the house hushed, my thoughts ran in circles. Is this love? Is this duty? Or is it something else entirely? The servants never met my eyes. The halls echoed with footsteps, but never warmth. I could walk from one wing of the house to the other, and feel as if I had crossed into another country, yet never truly arrived. The walls were beautiful, but silent. Silent in the way a locked room is silent. One evening, the truth revealed itself plain. We sat at dinner, the table long enough for 20, but it was only us. My plate untouched, his wine glowing under the chandelier. He leaned back casual and said to a man visiting from the city, "She's mine. She won't leave." He said it lightly, like a joke. But his eyes didn't joke. They locked on me like chains. I wanted to speak, to shout that I wasn't property, that I was Aurora Bennett, once full of ambition, once full of law and light and dreams. But my throat closed. My words dissolved before they could take shape. That night, I lay awake in the enormous bed, the sheets cool against my skin, the ceiling so high it made me feel like a child again. Only this time, there was no comfort, just the gnawing weight of a promise spoken without my consent. She's mine. She won't leave. The words looped in my head, steady as a heartbeat, cruel as a verdict, and I understood not in theory, not in fear, but deep in my bones that I was no longer living my life. I was living his design of me. Day by day I sank quieter, my smiles rehearsed, my steps measured, my books hidden deeper under pillows, pages read faster in the bathroom, the one place with a lock that still worked. The mansion sparkled to the world outside, but inside, I was already fading, and though I didn't know it then, that fading, that slow drowning in walls that pretended to shine, was planting something darker, a despair that waited, patient, for the weight of new life, and crushed me when it arrived. That would come later, but even then, in those early months, the house already owned me. It wrapped me in silence, fed me correction, taught me obedience, and me, young afraid already traded, I obeyed, because Damien was right about one thing. I didn't leave. I couldn't. Not yet. People see me today with my son and think motherhood saved me. They see the lunches I pack, the steady hands I bring into court, the way his laugh cracks me open, and they say strength like it's a simple thing. The truth is, in the beginning it almost destroyed me. I loved him from the moment I felt him turn under my ribs, and I was drowning anyway. When I told Damien I was pregnant, his smile didn't reach me. It reached the rooms. It reached the calendar, the guest lists, the wing of the house that would be refitted into a nursery. He took the news like an acquisition closing. From that day on, he measured everything about me, what I ate, how I slept, whether I walked too fast or spoke too long on the phone. He called it care. It felt like custody. I became a timetable with a heartbeat. I kept a secret I was barely allowed to hold. At night, I lay on my side and pressed my palm to the small curve of a future, and whispered case law I still remembered like lullabies for both of us. I promised my son he would know a different world. I promised myself I would return to the one I'd left. Promises are light. Control is heavy. Control wins. The day he was born, the hospital lights were too white to be kind. Voices came and went like waves I could not ride. A nurse told me to breathe. Another counted. Someone congratulated Damien before anyone looked at me. The room lifted him up, our child perfect and furious, and lifted Damien with him as if the two were one achievement. I lay there shaking, hollowed out, and tried to memorize the new sound that would bind me to the earth forever. Home was no softer. The nursery gleamed in pale blues and quiet animals painted in gentle lines. The crib was a ship. The curtains were clouds. None of it stopped the crying. Night fell, and rose, and fell again. The hours broke into fragments, diapers, swaddles, milk that wouldn't let down because my body had forgotten how to belong to me. I walked circles into the rug, shushing, humming, pleading, with a sky that would not answer. The house stayed beautiful and empty, a museum of light around a mother who could not stop trembling. Help was theoretical. Damien had hired staff, yes. They came in on soft shoes and waited for instructions. But instructions are nothing at 2 a.m. when the baby arcs in your arms like grief, when your chest is a locked door, and the knock does not stop. I learned the shape of exhaustion that does not sleep, the buzzing at the edges of vision, the way you forget simple words, the way your own name feels heavy in your mouth. I learned that love can coexist with panic. I learned that both can be absolute. I tried to tell him. I tried to say that I was slipping, that the nights were long in a way clocks didn't measure, that the mirror had started returning a stranger with my eyes. He sat on the edge of the bed smoothing a tie and said, "Millions of women give birth every day. Stop being dramatic." He kissed my hair like a signature. He left me with the silence. After that, I talked less. To him. To anyone. I kept a chair by the crib and wore a path to. It wore a path from it, the same small loop over and over until the carpet flattened under my feet. I learned the small physics of survival, warm water on a washcloth, to wipe his face between cries, counting 10 slow breaths with my hand on his back, keeping crackers in the pocket of my robe so I wouldn't forget to eat. I made lists I never finished. I cried without sound, because sound woke him. Silence woke me. Then he got sick. A small fever at first, the kind you're supposed to meet with calm. But calm doesn't live in a house like ours. It lives in houses with shared beds and soft voices and someone to say, "I'm here, sleep now." The thermometer climbed, the air thinned, his breath came rough and small. I called for Damien. He was in the study, the door shut like a verdict. He said he'd called the pediatrician. He said it wasn't serious. He said to stop spiraling and keep the noise down. I sat in the nursery all night with cool cloths and prayers that had no words. The humidifier hummed. The monitor blinked. I counted each rise of his tiny chest and thought about every morning I had ever woken without understanding what a miracle it was. The fever finally bent a fraction. Dawn slid a pale blade between the curtains, and I, who had not slept, learned I could still stand. By then, the dark had learned me. It found me, even in daylight, the slow fog that makes every choice feel wrong, the guilt that sticks to your skin, the thought you don't want and cannot stop. I looked in the mirror and saw a body I didn't recognize. I looked at my son and felt love so sharp, it scared me. I looked at the window and it looked back. An answer I didn't want, a way out that wasn't a door. The thought came like a whisper that wasn't mine. The room narrowed, the air thinned, the floor tilted toward a place where pain would be quiet at last. And then he cried, just a small sound, not the piercing wail I had braced for, but a startled, searching cry, like a hand held out in the dark. I went to him on knees that weren't steady and lifted him to my chest. He was hot, then less hot, heavy in the way the living are heavy. He turned his face toward the only thing I had to give and held on. A fist no wider than a plum wrapped itself around my finger, and something in me, something that had been sliding, caught. I sat on the floor beside the crib and rocked while the daylight gathered. I breathed when he breathed. I counted his breaths to trick mine into continuing. I said his name like a spell. I said my own name after it, just to hear that both could exist in the same room. The urge to vanish didn't leave instantly. It never does. It receded like a tide that promised to come again, and I knew I would need help if I was going to survive the next time it rose. Later, when Damien finally opened the door and asked if we'd sorted it out, I didn't answer. The words I needed weren't built yet, but something else was. A small, stubborn decision lit from within by a cry that had pulled me back to the shore. I would find someone to talk to. I would say the hard things out loud. I would learn how to keep breathing even when the waves forgot how to pass. People look at me now and call me strong, but strength didn't save me. A cry did. A hand the size of a miracle closed around my finger and tethered me to the earth. I sat there, shaking, with the sun finally at the edge of the window, and I understood the truth I had been afraid to say. Motherhood didn't save me at first. It almost destroyed me, and then, slowly, stubbornly, unbearably, it gave me a reason not to disappear. I stayed because he asked me to, with a sound that didn't know words. I stayed because love can be a chain and a lifeline at once. I stayed because when the dark made its offer, my sun made another. And I chose him. Sometimes I wake up at night drenched in sweat, remembering the moment I almost ended everything, the rope, the beam above me, the silence I thought would finally set me free. People imagine a breaking point is sudden like glass shattering in one strike, but mine was slow. It was nights without sleep, days with no air, a baby in my arms crying until his body arched with grief. A husband who closed doors in my face and called me dramatic. The breaking didn't come like thunder. It came like water dripping steady constant until the stone inside me cracked. That evening was heavy. Rain tapped against the window like a reminder that the world kept moving even if I was sinking. Damien had shut himself in the study. I had begged him earlier, begged him to sit with me, begged him to hold his son just for an hour so I could breathe. He didn't even look up from his papers. Millions of women give birth every day, he said. You're not special. Stop making everything about you. And then the door clicked shut. I felt something shut inside me too. I carried my son back to the nursery, humming through a throat that ached from silence. His little chest rattled with each breath, the sound of a cough that would not leave. I pressed a cloth to his forehead. I rocked him until my arms burned, and when he finally slipped into shallow sleep, I laid him down, touched his cheek one last time, and walked away. The hallway was long and dark. My robe dragged behind me. My bare feet stuck to the wood like they didn't want to go, but I kept walking. The storage room was colder than the rest of the house. Dust floated in the air, lit by a single bulb that buzzed overhead. I had seen the rope weeks before, coiled in a box. That night, I took it out. My hands trembled, but the knot came together anyway. Fingers remember things even when the heart is breaking. I stood on the chair. The rope felt rough against my palm. I looped it over the beam, pulled it tight, tied it again just to be sure. The chair wobbled under my weight. The world blurred at the edges. And for a moment, one terrifying, peaceful moment, I imagined it. The silence. No more crying. No more shaking awake at 3 a.m. with guilt gnawing through my chest. No more Damien's voice slicing me apart. Just stillness. Just the release of letting go. I put the rope around my neck. I closed my eyes. I thought of nothing and of everything. I thought of my son's face. His tiny hand wrapped around my finger, the way his breath had steadied mine in the worst nights. And then I told myself he would forget me, that someone else would care for him better, that he deserved more than a mother who was breaking apart. The chair tilted under me. The rope pressed closer. My breath stuttered. The world went very small, very sharp, very final. And then, he cried, from down the hallway, from the nursery, a sound cut through the silence like a blade. Not the full-throated wail I knew so well, just a small, startled cry, a searching sound, like a hand reaching out in the dark. My body froze. My heart lurched so hard, I thought the rope had already taken me. The sound came again, higher, urgent, helpless. My son. I ripped the rope from my neck. My hands burned where the fibers scraped my skin. The chair clattered to the floor as I stumbled down the hallway, half falling, half running. My chest was on fire. My lungs refused air. But I kept moving. I burst into the nursery. He was there, red-faced, kicking, alive. He needed me. He called me back from the edge. Without even knowing, I lifted him, pressed him to my chest, felt his small body against mine, hot and trembling. His cry broke into hiccups. My tears broke into sobs. On that floor beside the crib, I clutched him like an anchor. I rocked us both. I breathed when he breathed. I whispered his name over and over like a spell that might keep me tethered to the earth. And in that moment, I realized I had almost left him. I had almost chosen silence over his voice. I had almost broken the only promise that mattered. I wanted to vanish, but he wanted me here. That was the night I decided I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep walking into the dark alone. I needed help, not Damien's kind of help control disguised as care. Real help. The kind you whisper to strangers in a room with a couch. The kind where you say the ugliest words and no one looks away. So I made a promise again, not the light kind, not the ones that disappear. A promise made in sweat and tears, with the rope still burning my hands. I promised to fight for myself the way I fought for him, because sometimes the difference between life and death is a cry in the dark. Sometimes it's the sound of a child reminding you that love can chain you to this world and still save you. And I stayed. I stayed because he asked me to without words. I stayed because the rope let go when he didn't. I stayed because in that single cry, my son pulled me back from the edge and gave me the one thing I thought I had lost forever, a reason to live. I remember the night I finally decided I couldn't live like that anymore. Therapy had started to give me a voice again, soft at first, shaky, but mine. Each week I would sit in that little office, pretending I was at the library, pretending I was still the girl who had once dreamed of becoming a lawyer. And little by little, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I was still her, somewhere under the fear, somewhere under Damien's shadow. But strength does not return quietly. It comes with sparks, with fire, with clashes that shake the walls. The night it all exploded, I had told Damien I wanted to go back to school. I had whispered it at first, testing the ground, watching his eyes narrow the way they always did when control slipped through his fingers. He didn't answer me that night, just left the room, and I thought maybe silence was safer than rage. But the next morning, the storm came. He slammed a mug onto the table so hard, the handle snapped clean off. His voice, it wasn't even a voice, it was a roar. You think you can walk back into that world? You think you can embarrass me, make me look like I can't provide for my own wife? His face was red, his hands shaking, and I swear for a second I thought he might hit me. I stood frozen, my heart pounding so hard it drowned everything else out. But something inside me, something small, trembling, alive, told me not to bow this time. I'm not your possession, I whispered. My throat burned, my knees felt weak, but I said it, and once it was out, there was no taking it back. He laughed, that cruel, cold laugh that always cut me to pieces. Possession. You're nothing without me. You'll crawl back when you realize no one else wants you. Not after what I've given you, not after the life you've lived. Those words, they hit me like a knife, but they also lit something inside me, because for the first time, I realized he was wrong. I still had something. I had my mind. I had my courage. I had my son. Even if the world thought Damien held all the cards. That night, I sat in my room with the divorce papers spread across the desk. My hand shook as I signed them. Every stroke of the pen felt like a battle cry and a funeral at the same time. I wasn't just divorcing a man. I was divorcing the girl I had been forced to become. But nothing prepared me for the courtroom. I walked in clutching my attorney's arm, my stomach in knots. My breath caught somewhere between hope and despair. Damien sat across the room in his perfect suit, calm, collected, smiling like he had already won, and maybe he had. His lawyers were polished, ruthless. His money lined every corner of the room. When the judge spoke, I felt the floor tilt. Custody to the father. My ears rang. My body went cold. My heart stopped and then slammed back into motion with a force that nearly doubled me over. They were taking my son from me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw myself across the table, beg, claw at the air, make them hear me, but I couldn't move. My knees locked. My mouth opened and closed like I was drowning, because I was. The day I had to hand him over, that day still lives inside my bones. He clung to my shirt, his tiny fists grasping, his cries splitting the air. "Mama, no! Mama, don't go!" The sound tore through me like lightning. I kissed his hair, breathed him in like it was the last air I'd ever take. And then I let go. I let go because the law said I had to, because Damien's power was stronger than my plea, because love does not always win in courtrooms. Sometimes it only breaks you. I stumbled back to my apartment. No, not an apartment. A box. One bedroom, peeling paint, a mattress on the floor, and silence so loud it pressed against my ears. I unpacked what I had left: a few clothes, some kitchenware, and the box of old law books I had carried like relics from another life. I set them on the shelf like they were friends waiting for me. Pages whispering promises I wasn't sure I could keep. That first night alone, I sat on the floor with tears soaking my shirt. Around me, the walls felt close, suffocating, like the cage had only changed shape. But then I touched one of the books, Criminal Law 2nd edition, underlined with my notes from a younger, brighter time, and I felt something stir, a memory, a fire. I whispered to myself, "This is not the end. You will come back. You will rise." And maybe I didn't believe it yet. Maybe I was still broken, still bleeding, still gasping from the loss of my son. But even in that tiny apartment, surrounded by dust and despair, I carried a flicker of hope, a hope that one day I would fight back, a hope that one day I would stand taller than the man who thought he owned me, a hope that one day I would hold my son again. And so, with books beside me, tears still on my face, and a sliver of courage burning in my chest, I decided I would not give up. Not yet. Not ever. When people call me strong, I want to laugh, because they don't see the truth. They don't see the nights I sat at a rickety desk, tears falling on secondhand textbooks, trying to memorize case law while my stomach growled and the walls felt like they were closing in. Strong, no. I wasn't strong. I was desperate. Desperate not to drown in the silence Damien left me with. My apartment. It was nothing more than a box, a mattress on the floor, a lamp that flickered, a desk I dragged up 3 flights of stairs from a thrift store, and stacks of books, heavy old, their pages yellow and brittle. They were the only friends I had left. Every night after my shift-waiting tables, I would stumble through the door, feet aching, uniforms stained with coffee and grease. I wanted nothing more than to sleep, but sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. The exams were waiting, the books were waiting, the dream I had once buried under Damien's thumb was clawing its way back to me. So I'd light the lamp. I'd pour what little coffee I had left, sometimes just hot water, with a spoon of sugar if I even had sugar, and I'd open those books. Contracts, torts, criminal law. The words stared back at me like strangers sharp and unforgiving. I whispered them out loud again and again, like prayers to a God I wasn't sure still listened. Some nights, I'd catch myself nodding off forehead pressed to the page. Other nights, I'd cry until the ink blurred and the words disappeared. And still, I turned the pages. But the hardest part wasn't the hunger, wasn't the exhaustion. It was the silence. Because in that silence, I could hear his laugh, my son's laugh, the way he used to climb into my lap with his toy cars pressing them against my arm, demanding I make engine noises. I would look at the photograph on my desk, his big brown eyes staring back at me frozen in a moment I couldn't return to. And I would break all over again. Do you know what it's like to love someone so fiercely and be told you're not enough to raise him, to walk out of a courtroom empty-handed, while the man who broke you smiles because he still holds the only piece of your heart that matters? Every night I whispered to that picture, "This is for you. One day I'll be strong enough to bring you back to me." But the truth. Most nights I didn't believe it. Most nights I felt like I was lying to both of us. That's when Dr. Collins entered my life. I didn't trust him at first. Therapy felt like weakness, like sitting in a chair and admitting I was broken beyond repair. But his office was warm. Books lined the walls neat and steady, as if they hadn't been touched by chaos. Sunlight fell gently through the blinds, and somehow sitting there, I spoke. I spoke about Damien, about the bruises no one could see, about the rope I almost tied, the night my son's cry pulled me back from the edge, about the silence of my apartment and the photograph I clutched like it was air. He didn't judge me. He didn't tell me to stop crying. He just listened. And when I was empty, when the words dried up, he leaned forward and said, "You have survived everything meant to destroy you. That is not weakness, Aurora. That is strength. Strength." The word tasted foreign, but I carried it with me. Back to the desk, back to the books, back into the icy wind on nights I trudged home with snow soaking through my shoes. Exams came like waves, unending, unforgiving. My heart would pound so hard in the silence of the exam hall that I could barely read the questions. But I wrote anyway, shaking hands, sweaty palms. Page after page filled with everything I had bled into those long nights. I failed some, I passed others, and slowly, painfully, stubbornly I began to climb. But the loneliness, it never left. My classmates joked in groups, their futures wide open. Internships, parties, weddings, plans that felt like another world. I would smile politely, then leave. Because my nights weren't filled with laughter. They were filled with silence, with whispers to a photograph, with tears that fell into open books. Still somewhere in that silence, there was fire, a fire that refused to die. And then, graduation. I can still see it, the stage, the sea of faces, caps and gowns swaying like waves. I stood there, trembling hands, cold breath catching in my throat. When my name was called, I walked forward every step, echoing with the memory of chains I had once worn. The dean placed the diploma in my hand. It was heavy, heavier than paper should be, because it wasn't just paper. It was every night I whispered case law into the dark. Every moment I thought I was too late. Every hour I chose to keep going instead of giving in. And every heartbeat of the child I still ached for. In that moment, I wasn't on a stage anymore. I was back in my apartment, head bent over yellowed pages. I was back in the courtroom. Hearing the gavel seal my fate, I was back in the darkest night of my life. Rope in hand, my baby's cry piercing the silence. All of it, every scar, every tear, every sleepless night. It was here, in my hand, in this diploma that whispered, I had made it. I pressed it to my chest, and I whispered, not loud, not triumphant, but trembling raw alive. This is not the end. This is the beginning, and deep down, for the very first time, I believed it. In court, when I stand to speak, my voice is steady, but it carries the tremor of all the years I was silenced. I feel it in the first breath. I feel it in the way the wood of the lectern warms under my palms. And then I begin, and the tremor becomes a note I can hold. After graduation, I packed my books into a borrowed suitcase and took the train to a city that didn't know me. A scholarship, a seat at a prestigious law school, the very one I'd once traced with my finger on a brochure when I was 19 and unbroken. I was older than most of them, more tired, more haunted. I sat in the back row the first week, listening, measuring, afraid the room would hear my history before it heard my voice. But I chose my classes like a map: gender violence, child advocacy, trial practice. I signed up for the clinic that handled emergency protective orders and custody battles that felt impossible. If I was going to rebuild, I wanted to rebuild into someone who could open doors for women who had none left to open. I studied the way a drowning person swims with everything: mornings in lecture halls, afternoons in the clinic, nights with case files spread across a mattress, and cheap coffee burning my tongue. I learned the rhythm of affidavits, the weight of photos no one should ever have to hold, the law's small, precise tools sharp enough to cut chains if you used them right. I kept seeing my son's face in the margins of every page. The ache didn't dim, it focused me. Each statute I memorized was a step toward him, toward the woman I promised I would become for him. Andrew stayed in my life carefully, the way a lighthouse stays in the life of a ship. We kept the boundaries. We met in that quiet office with the soft lamps. We did the work. Some days I was all edges. Some days I could barely speak. He never reached to fix me. He sat with me while I learned to fix myself. When he said we were nearing the end of treatment, I was afraid. Not of leaving exactly, but of walking alone. You're already walking, he told me. You just haven't looked down to see your feet. We ended well. We ended right. And after time, past real time, the kind ethics demands and healing requires, I'd see him again, at a public lecture, at a clinic fundraiser, and we would talk like two people who had earned the right to be new. My first hearing came on a gray morning. The air smelled of wet concrete and coffee. I wore a thrifted suit and a resolve that didn't fit yet. My client sat beside me, hands shaking, sleeve tugged down to hide a bruise. I whispered what I once wished someone had whispered to me. You are not alone. We're going to do this together. Good morning, Your Honor. My voice found the room. The tremor lived there. Yes, but it didn't rule. I laid out the facts, the timeline, the messages that started like apologies and ended like threats. I guided her through testimony, one breath at a time. Water, pause, look at me, not at him. The old fear rose when I heard his chair scrape, when his lawyer objected with a smirk, when the judge frowned at the clock. But I didn't leave my body the way I used to. I stayed. I built, brick by careful brick. When the order was granted, the sound in my chest wasn't triumph. It was release. Outside the courthouse, she gripped my hands. You gave me back my voice, she said. I shook my head. You never lost it. Then I turned away into the cold sun, and for the first time in a very long time, I cried for something that wasn't grief. Word traveled through shelters, hotlines, whispered recommendations in waiting rooms. I became the woman to call when a door had been slammed too many times. I lost cases, too. I'm not a myth. But even in the losses, we built records. We made a trail. We planted something that could grow later. Each win felt like a brick pulled from the wall that once held me. Each loss taught me where the wall was strongest and where to press next time. School bled into practice. The clinic turned into clerkships, then into a job with a firm that let me carve out a corner for the work I couldn't stop doing. I wrote motions at midnight, met clients in church basements, kept spare phone chargers in my bag for women who had run without packing. I learned to hold a shaking hand without promising anything I couldn't deliver. I learned to promise the one thing I could, I will not look away. And Andrew moved from the edges toward the center of my days, slowly, the way dawn moves across a room. After therapy ended and time had done its work, we crossed paths again. At a panel on trauma-informed advocacy, he asked how I was not the polite kind of asking, the real kind. We had coffee in a crowded cafe. Steam fogged the windows. My guard didn't have to be perfect. We talked about books, about music, about how healing isn't a staircase, it's a tide. We were careful. We were patient. He never touched me without asking. He never told me who to be. He asked who I wanted to become and listened to the answer. There was a case that marked me, a mother with a little girl who wouldn't speak above a whisper. The father was well-liked, well-dressed, well-connected, the kind of man people apologize for before they hear the story. We fought for an emergency change in custody. The opposition called me emotional, as if that were an argument instead of an observation. I put the report on the record, the pediatrician on the stand, the timeline in the judge's hands, like evidence and prayer braided together. When the ruling came, supervised visitation, only protective order extended, the mother's knees buckled. I held her up. That night, I went home and set another place at my small table, one for who I used to be. I told her softly, "See, we are doing it. I am not fearless. I am not healed into stone. Some mornings the tremor is louder. Some nights the old house returns in dreams. The long hallway, the closed study door, the sentence that once chained me. But in court, when I rise, I bring it all with me. The rope I did not tie, the photograph I kissed goodnight, the textbooks warped with tears. I let it hum under the words. I let it remind me why I am speaking. I win sometimes. I lose sometimes. I appeal when I must. I teach workshops in rooms with bad acoustics and harsh fluorescent lights. I watch a woman straighten her back as she learns the language to name what happened to her, and I feel something inside me straighten too. Every time a judge says granted, every time a child is placed in safer arms, every time a client signs her own name on a lease, a chain somewhere in me loosens another notch. And when the day is over, when the courthouse empties and the echo fades, I walk out under an honest skin, and I text Andrew a photo of the sun. He texts back a question mark, or a small heart, or a line from a poem. We are careful. We are slow. We are not a rescue story. We are two people choosing the same direction, one day at a time. In court, my voice is steady. It carries the tremor, yes, the memory of all the years I was silenced, but it also carries something else now, the weight of women who stand beside me, the light from the face of a boy I still fight to bring home, the simple defiant truth that I am here, and I will not be quiet again. I look at my son sleeping now, And sometimes I wonder if he knows. He saved me twice, first with his cry, then with his smile when the judge said custody awarded to the mother. The words did not arrive all at once. They came like light through heavy clouds, slow, careful, undeniable. I stood there in that small, echoing courtroom, palms pressed to the table, breath caught between hope and the ache of too many losses. My voice had already done its work. The filings, the testimony, the years of learning how to turn pain into argument and argument into law. Then the judge spoke. A pause, the kind that teaches you how long a second can be, and then the sentence that split my life open, custody to the mother. I did not shout. I did not fall. I just felt the ground come back to meet me like a hand held out from the shore. My son was in the hallway with the guardian a single step beyond the heavy door. When I turned, he was already moving that quick, wild run that children make when the rules finally allow joy. He crashed into me, arms around my neck, laughing and crying in the same breath. I heard the bailiff clear his throat, the scrape of a chair, the rustle of papers. But all I could feel was the weight of him, warm, real mine. Damien's voice came from behind us low. At first, then rising the old thunder trying to find the sky. This is a mistake. This is not over. But the thunder had lost its storm. His suit still fit, but his power didn't. The mask of certainty slipped, and beneath it, just a man railing at a tide that would not obey him. His lawyer tugged his sleeve. The judge lifted a hand. The gavel did not need to fall. It was already finished. Outside the courthouse, the day was almost too bright. Stairs, stone, a clean wind that felt like a new alphabet forming in my lungs. Andrew waited at the bottom step. No speeches, no rescue. He just opened his arms, and the three of us, my boy between us, stood there while the traffic moved and the city didn't know what had changed. He whispered, "Take your time," and for once, time listened. The first night back, our apartment looked different, not bigger, just truer. My son carried his backpack in like a flag. He announced that the bed was too serious and the floor needed a fort. We built 1 chairs, blankets, a flashlight that made our ceiling into a private galaxy. We ate pasta that stuck to the pot and laughed anyway. I showed him the small scar on my thumb from burning the sauce, and he declared me brave. I did not argue. There were chores to invent and rituals to learn, mornings with mismatched socks and cereal that somehow landed on the cat. Evenings with spelling lists and my laptop open beside his crayons. I made lunches with small notes tucked under the fruit, a joke, a reminder, a simple, "I love you," in block letters he could sound out. On the days he woke from a bad dream, I did not tell him to be brave. I told him I was here. We counted breaths together until the dark remembered how to go quiet. And Andrew, we let the days teach us how to be gentle. He came over with secondhand books for the fort and a toolbox for the squeaking cabinet door. He asked before he stayed, asked before he left, asked before he reached for my hand in the kitchen light. He never tried to finish my sentences. He asked the questions that let me finish them myself. We did not hurry. We did not pretend the past had vanished. We learned to set it down and step forward anyway. At night, the new kind of night, the kind with 2 toothbrushes by the sink and a pair of small shoes waiting at the door, I would stand at the window and watch the city breathe. Some memories still arrived uninvited, the long hallway of the old house, the click of a locked study, the sentence that once claimed me. But they no longer ran the room. They passed through and left me standing, whole enough to hold what came next. I returned to court the following week and the week after that. My voice carried further, not louder, steadier, clearer, threaded with all the women whose names I'd learned to say with respect and without pity. When I stood to speak, I carried my son's laughter in my pocket like a talisman, and when I sat down, I thought of the mothers who would walk home with their children because a door had opened where a wall used to be. Damien tried to rattle the cage that used to hold me. Motions, rumors, an attempt to turn back the tide with paperwork and a glare. But lies grow brittle when truth keeps showing up. He faded the way a storm fades not into nothing, but into distance. I did not celebrate that. I simply let it be. One evening, after homework and dishes and the quiet game of who can brush their teeth, the longest, my son fell asleep with a book open on his chest, his mouth soft, his eyelashes a dark fan on his cheek. I sat beside him, listening to the small rhythm of his breathing, and I felt it, the hush that isn't emptiness, the silence that finally means rest. I thought about the girl who once whispered case law into a room that refused to answer. I thought about the woman who walked into a courtroom and learned to speak her life back into being. I thought about how salvation sometimes comes as a cry, and sometimes as a smile you have waited years to earn. I stepped into the hallway and found Andrew in the kitchen rinsing mugs. He looked up, and I nodded the kind of nod that needs no translation. He dried his hands. He didn't ask for more than I could give. He held me the way a harbor holds a ship that has learned the cost of crossing. We stood there quiet while the dishwasher hummed its small approval. People ask me if I have forgiven the past. The truth is softer and more complicated. I forgave myself for staying as long as I did. I forgave the woman who chose survival over pride. I forgave the silence that kept me alive until I had the words to leave. Forgiveness for me is not a pardon for harm, it is permission to go on living. Sometimes I wake before dawn, the city still blue and barely awake. I stand at the window with a cup of coffee that finally tastes like something other than endurance. I look at the sky and think of the gilded cage, how bright it was, how heavy. And then I look at the bed where my son sleeps, one knee thrown over the blanket, a hand open in trust, and I feel the air move through the room as if the walls have learned a new language. This is what freedom sounds like. The kettle cooling, a child breathing, a heartbeat that does not flinch when the floor creaks. I look at my son sleeping now, and I wonder if he knows. He saved me twice, first with his cry, then with his smile when the judge spoke the words that returned me to myself. I thought I had been broken forever, but in the end, I wasn't just free. I was finally whole.